Hi everyone, it's Jerry. This is Game 2 from the 2021 FIDE World Chess Championship match between Magnus Carlsen playing on the white end and Ian Nepomniachtchi. Game 1 was a draw. Let's see what happened in Game 2. Move 1, d4. Game 1 we had e4. The opening is a Catalan, g3, bishop g2, speedy development for white's light square bishop. It's already on the main diagonal. And because of this, black's light square bishop will oftentimes find it difficult to activate. Both sides castle, d takes c, and after queen c2, far and away most popular on this move 7 for black is to play a6, which prepares to meet queen takes c4 with b5, and there you go, just in the nick of time. Black is there on the main diagonal, preparing to offset white's light square bishop. There are deficiencies with this approach by black. A backward c-pawn, holes along the c-file. Okay. Second most popular move in the databases is this one right here, b5. Move played in the game, defends c4, but this rook is now a bit more vulnerable. White strikes at it. Black's limited. You have to clog up this diagonal in some way. Knight d5 is one, or the move played in the game, c6. This is a pawn that can be captured in two different ways. Let's not consider this one. This would be giving up a 4-point minor piece. Fianchettoed bishops, pretty important bishops to hang on to, especially if it's one that's on the king side. Without it, your king is more vulnerable. Let's look at this one. Knight takes first and then bishop. This isn't such a great approach for white. You do get the pawn back, but this bishop's in no man's land. Could easily be struck at. This rook, I think, is well placed, supporting queenside majority. Nearby, there can be a light square bishop exchange. White wouldn't want that. And black's development looks pretty good. So instead it's a4, thematic. Rook pawns like to attack knight pawns. In just a blink, this rook can be activated. However, this tension remains for some time. And I'll touch on why that's the case in just a bit. From here, we have the threat of a takes b, taking advantage of the pinned c6 pawn. Bishop b7 is not helping with this. So it's knight d5. And from here, we have knight c3. The knight is given a kick back to f3. This knight was in black's house. F6 is considered one of the best moves, if not the best move. But proceed with caution when you make those type of moves, that's for sure. All pieces are still on board. And to make this early commitment with one of the pawns on the king side, looking long term, e6 is a hole now. G7 is a bit more vulnerable. Should there ever be a white major piece on the 7th rank, it would be hit directly. This is the heart, after all, of black's king side. Okay. From here, it's queen d7. This is defending b5 directly. I'd like to highlight a big oversight I had during the live stream on Twitch. I was thinking in this position, is there anything wrong with putting the bishop on b7? There would be a big issue there. So let me show you what this big issue is. I thought that a takes b would be able to be met with not simply the recapture, white would get the pawn back, but I thought black would be able to meet a takes b with this in-betweener, capturing on c3, and only then capturing on b5. Now this position is excellent for black, if not for this one move. What is that move? Feel free to pause the video. Okay, here we go. Catalan players, Queen on c2, bishop on g2, knight g5. You like that one? That's slick. Threatening mate, and the bishop, the rook and the bishop. White wins. So this natural-looking bishop b7 is not working. Queen d7, defends b5. A little uncomfortable to make that move because the knight doesn't have access to the d7 square, but okay. It is one of the best moves, queen d7. From here, e4, white sets that majority in motion, the central majority in motion. Proceed with caution, team white, when you play e4, because now d3 is a hole. And it can, the knight can hop in there in just a couple, and does, along the way with tempo. Queen e2, knight d3. Does not stay here for long. e5, opening up a square for the knight, maybe the queen. Primarily the knight, likes to be tucked right behind a pawn. Don't forget about that bishop as well. Its eyes are back to being opened. Can see the queenside squares as soon as this knight moves. Okay, so now black gets on with development of the bishop. I was pointing out the timing of this capture. Let me highlight it right now. What was the move played here? We have a capture on f6. Why isn't a move like this played? Well, look at, we're helping the rook, but also the bishop. This is a reason to hold off on this particular capture. You help the rook, but the bishop as well. Chop on f6 in this game. Bishop recaptures. Knight e4, piece improvement, piece improvement, piece improvement. If black is trying to be greedy with a pawn capture, there would be knight takes bishop and knight to g5. And this is a big problem. What are we doing here? e6 is hit twice. There's also the threat of a fork. That wouldn't be a good choice. So Ian gets on with development. Knight a6 it is. Knight e5. And from here we have bishop takes knight. Now, in this position, if queen takes pawn is on board, what can we play here? We can play knight takes bishop. And after rook takes knight, we can capture on b5. That's looking pretty good. This pawn is ready to go into Pac-Man mode. It's true this knight is hanging, but this is looking pretty serious after a takes b5. Okay. No queen takes d4. Instead, it's bishop takes knight. You could also look at this one, but this variation right here, but that's not so good because after knight g5, once more, there's a problem here along the e file. White is converging on e6. So, after knight e5, it's bishop takes knight, pawn takes, and knight c5. So, there are outpost squares on the d file for each side. For white, d6. For black, d3. Black is also threatening with this last move to win the exchange, knight b3. And there's a problem on c1. White allows it. Jumps into d6 and says this knight right here is far more valuable than 3. Black goes for the exchange. Grabs on c1. Rook on b takes. And black simply captures the rook on c1. This rook right now is, in a way, overloaded. It has the responsibility of defending the rook and f2. So some tricks like rook takes f2 might be there, but not in this particular case, because after rook takes, this isn't even the best move. There are many winning moves. Queen f1 looks pretty nice though. Pretty easy to understand what's happening here. We're attacking the knight and forming this battery, and we're ready to get to the 7th rank. Rook f7. This guy is dead next. So these little tricks on f2 are not working. Black simply picks up the exchange. Knight takes rook, rook takes knight. It's not just the exchange that black is up. Black still has that extra pawn. But, again, this knight more valuable than 3, and this bishop less valuable than 3. It's going to still take some work, some time by black to activate this bishop. And, you know, ideas of getting to these light squares, seeing how this bishop is not really able to neutralize this guy so fast, this could be a problem for black. Proceed with caution. I believe right around here, if I'm recalling correctly during the live stream, it's saying black is better when you look at that evaluation number. But, you know, you look a little bit deeper in this position, you see that knight on d6, big piece, the best piece in this position. Okay. Rook b8, rook d1, setting up discoveries. Black says go ahead. I don't care which pawn you take. I'm fine with that. White doesn't bite. You could go ahead and grab the b pawn. And now, once the b pawn is gone, all of these pawns are super weak, isolated, many cases of isolated pawns. But instead, white looks to put some holes in the black king side, create some gaps, carve out some squares. He starts off with e4, bishop e4, preparing to create a battery. h7 is in white's crosshairs. c3, queen c2. So what are we doing about this threat on h7? g6. Now, if you go ahead and capture on g6 right here, this is something that definitely had to be weighed. We're going to look at that. Let's first get this capture, and he doesn't capture just yet. Goes on c3, and after the capture on a4, let's look at this capture at this moment. This is not good for white. Why not? Well, black can take. And after this, black is able to block. And after this one, the king goes here. This is winning for black. Why? Well, white needs one other attacker. He needs to get this rook involved. Needs to get this rook to h4, but that's not working because rook d4 can be met with rook b1 check, king g2. Ooh, that's really going to hurt. Discovered check. Your rook is hit. c5 saves the day. Would save the day. So these sacrifices on g6 are not working. By the way, after queen c2, we try and we defend. This is the main way to try and defend against this pressure. We're trying to stay strong somewhat as black on the light squares. When you play this, well, maybe white can shift gears and try and sneak in like that. Takes many moves, but that might not be long off. That could be a big problem for black. All right. In the game, it's g6, staying strong on the light squares. B takes c, b takes a, queen takes a. From here, we have rook d8. Queen is now defended. Black is just a moment away from playing c5. Finally, getting ready to challenge white's light square bishop Where are we at? Move 27? Yeah. It's taken some time, but just a blink away now is black in playing c5. Rook a1. Anticipating that this move is here, this bishop will be captured, and this knight wants to recapture. So this rook needs to get out of the way. c5 on board. Queen c4. This king is the more vulnerable. I didn't highlight this yet, and I should have. When this battery was formed and g6 is on board, this is a new gap in black's position. This knight stands well on d6 right now, but is only 2 moves away from getting to f6. That can be a far more, a much scarier square for black. The white knight is on f6. Okay, after queen c4, the bishops are exchanged. The knight recaptures with an eye on f6. This fork is nearby. In these situations, which of these two should you move first? This will land. What piece to go with first? The answer, the king, the one with the fewest options first. If the knight goes here, only then will you let white know, okay, I'm going to go to this particular square with my queen. Fewer options first, go with that one. King, the piece with the fewer options. So king h8 is a nice move. And from here, I was thinking the knight was going to jump right into f6, but it simply returns to d6. It clogs up these major pieces. They will not see white's side of the board so easily. And also, we could say to ourselves, well, the knight stays in a position where it has a check. Now, something I like to add here is the possibility for Anastasia's mate. This knight on f6 is pretty powerful. Let me highlight a continuation here. If the knight jumped into f6 and black says, well, I don't like that my king is the more vulnerable. Let's try and exchange queens. That's a good way to lose. White can take the queen straight away or even be fancy, capturing on a7 and say, go ahead, take my queen. This is Anastasia's mate. Powerful knight. King in the corner, knight 2 squares away along the diagonal, sets this up. Of course, you could go ahead and take the queen first and then this, and mate is unavoidable. Yeah, a powerful piece for sure, a knight on f6. Plenty of mating nets. In this game, it's knight d6, rook b6, hinting at giving the exchange back, getting rid of the knight. Queen takes c5. Black doubles. King g2. Black could, if he wants, he could get rid of the queens right now with queen c6. Doesn't go for that. How might this play out if queen c6 is on board? This is still, this is a pretty drawish position right here. Rook takes pawn, knight e4. There's only one move here. You have to anticipate knight on f6. Black would have a saving move, preparing to meet knight f6 with rook to b7, some rook to b7. No queen c6 in this game. Instead, a6. Doesn't even want to give up that a pawn. So white says, well, I'm not going to give you another chance to exchange queens. Queen c6 is not hitting with check anymore, so the white king hides. h6. It looks a little weird. Still all major pieces on black's side at least. And the king is on h3. It would be nice if this pawn was already on h4 and then king h3. It would feel somewhat more natural to not have your h-pawn obstructed and maybe even look to push your pawn further to disrupt black's king side structure. Okay, But timing-wise, it's not there. King h3 in this game, move 34. Rook c6, queen d4. Gets out of a check. Not saying that's a great move straight away, but slight improvement for the king. If your knight's going to be on d6, okay, I'm going to put my king on g8. c4. The knight has this responsibility to defend the pawn, so this frees up the queen maybe to go elsewhere. She does. After queen c7, this is now vulnerable. So white targets that. But black is able to now give the exchange back. Has that option to take the knight. Goes for it. Rook takes knight. Material-wise, we are now balanced. The black king is still the more vulnerable. From here, it's c5, queen takes c, queen takes e with check. After king moves, rook takes a. 3 versus 2, pawns on the same side. This rook is not able to get to the 7th rank, though. This gives black time to organize the pieces. Rook f8. Now f2 is hit twice. Defended 0. Some check, I believe, could be met with rook f7. And you'll be getting this pawn shortly. So white saves the f-pawn. But now this allows black to exchange queens. And even though black is down a pawn, since we're working with pawns on the same wing, the king side, it's tough to create any winning chances here for white. Let's have a look at Carlsen's approach. The game does continue. He's still trying to stir up some trouble. This World Chess Championship match is a marathon, so maybe some, trying to, wear out your opponent over each and every one of these games. Let's see the approach. Trying to extract blood from a stone here. If white is going to have any chance, he needs to disrupt this structure. Ideally, you want to get this pawn up to h5. You need to create tension with the g-pawn. So, first step is to take over control of the 5th rank. If this rook is allowed to patrol the 5th rank, it's difficult to ever get in h5. So white kicks the rook off of the 5th rank, and now gets rolling with the h-pawn. I like this next move by black. He goes with king h6. I like this move because if you simply sit, white can play king g5. This is still a drawn position, but now all of a sudden black has to ask himself, am I okay with allowing the pawn to get to h6? It's 2 steps away from queening. There's still this guy in its way, but do I want to allow this pawn to get to h6? How do I feel about that structure? Or do I give the white king a kick and then allow this exchange to eventually happen, right? That's unavoidable. This exchange will happen. Am I okay with giving white a passed f-pawn? This is still considered a draw, but there's a little more concern, I believe, black would have with this particular structure. If it's the case where these pawns are simply exchanged, this is much easier to defend. There are no passed pawns present for white in this scenario. Okay, so I like king h6 because you don't even allow the possibility of king g5, and you don't have to deal with maybe not a capture, but you have to consider, should I allow that pawn to get to h6? All right, king h6. In this game, king h4. Rook a1 g4. Carlsen's still trying, so if black does nothing, let's say brings the rook back, is this going to be all right for black? The computer says yes, but I don't know if you really want to allow that. It's not as clear. We want to get pawn exchanges in there. We don't want to allow this guy to get to the 6th rank, establish himself on that 6th rank. So black is there in time in this game to give some checks. Inconvenience the king. Capture on h5. If you take like this, this is a draw. The idea here by white is to meet this capture with a check and preserve this pawn. Now white has a passer, but it's balanced. 2 pawns apiece, not the healthiest of pawns. Continuing another check. The rook is always in a position to rattle the defending side here. Black is always in a position to challenge that white king. So there we go. Rook a4, pressure on this guy. King f3, rook a3, king f2, rook a4, and at this point, a draw was agreed to. Game 2 ended peacefully, but another fighting draw. I'd say more of a fighting draw than game 1. Very interesting middle game. Why is this final position a draw? Is there something else white can try? Let's say king g3 and rook a3. And suppose the king tries to hide here. Black can follow up with rook f3. And how are we defending this pawn? Rook f6. Black can follow up with h6. Can't do that. Drop the rook. And if rook takes pawn, there's rook here. King takes pawn, and now this rook comes back, and the king is ready to be challenged along the h-file, g-file, f-file. Some other variation. Not sure what more to try here. Let's say king takes pawn. We can take here. King takes pawn. And this too is going to be a draw. The rook gets to have some fun giving checks. Rook here. Yeah, there's probably other draws as well. The rook can come over. No good winning chances here for white in this ending. So it ended peacefully after move 58. About a 4.5 hour game 2. So let's have a look at the tail of the tape on this one. And we can see that these guys continue to play super accurate. What did it ever get down to? Minus 0.8. But yeah, with those imbalances, even though it's getting to this, minus 1.5, that knight on d6, that white knight on d6, quite the piece. And eventually it was so annoying, black went ahead and gave the exchange right back. It's quite the flat line here from move 28 on. At the end of the day, what do we have? Average centi pawn loss, 9 for Carlsen, 10 for Nepomniachtchi. We remain deadlocked going into game 3. Okay, well, that's all for this video. Feel free, as usual, to leave any feedback in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed it and maybe took a thing or two away. That's all for now. Take care. Bye.